What does September the 11th, 2001 and the Gulf oil spill of 2010 have in common? Many people do not realize that the capital of the United States of America has not always been in Washington, D.C. Prior to Washington, D.C., the capital was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. But prior to that, the capital of the United States was in the same city in which George Washington was inaugurated, New York City. On April the 30th, 1789, in New York City, George Washington was sworn in as our nation's first president. On that same day, Washington and other government officials made their way down the street to a little chapel to commit the nation to God. Where was that chapel located? It was located on the corner of what is now called Ground Zero. On September the 11th, 2001, our nation suffered its worst and most devastating mainland attack in its history. The epicenter was downtown New York City. 2 planes, the Twin Towers, the very locale of where our national government started. But there were 2 other disasters that same day, directly connected to the 9/11 terrorist attack. One of the planes, Flight 93, crashed in Pennsylvania, the home of our second capital, and the 4th plane crashed in Washington, D.C., into the Pentagon, the home of our third and final capital. All 3 places where our nation's government began were all victims on the same day of terrorist devastation. New York City is the home of our financial markets and represents our power, wealth, and prosperity. It is the home of the United Nations and represents our influence over the nations of the world. Pennsylvania is the home of our Declaration of Independence and constitutional draftings, and Washington, D.C., the home of our current seat of power, and the Pentagon, the seat of our military superpower status. But consider this. While it is true that our nation's government began in New York City, and that is precisely where the epicenter of the 9/11 attacks were located, it is also true that our nation had its original settlement foundings on the Gulf Coast. In fact, again, many people do not know that Pensacola, Florida is the oldest city in the United States. It was founded in 1559 but later destroyed by a hurricane in 1561. It was reestablished and flourished continually since the early 1600s. It is now home to Pensacola Naval Air Station, the cradle of naval aviation, and an undeniable symbol of America's superpower status. Incidentally, it is the Gulf Coast where the celebration of carnality, Mardi Gras, was first introduced to the United States. New Orleans was a major slave market. Mobile was the beginning of the first horse-drawn Mardi Gras float parades, dubbing its very first parade the Festival of Heathen Gods and Goddesses. Where the nation was settled and founded along the Gulf Coast, between Pensacola and New Orleans, is where the Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded on April the 20th, 2010. And what are the roots of our nation's heritage? Europe, and specifically Great Britain. And what is the national origin of the oil company responsible for the oil spill? Great Britain. And if the oil gets into the Gulf Loop current, as some experts predict is highly possible, where will the oil wind up? Along the shores of the eastern United States, passing New York City and Washington, D.C., and ending up in Great Britain. 9/11, New York City, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., all the seats of our governmental beginnings. 2010, the Deepwater Horizon Gulf oil spill, the Gulf Coast of the United States of America, where our nation had its settlement foundings. Is all of this strange coincidence? Or could it be the hand and the judgment of God?